JonBenét Ramsey's name has haunted America for nearly 3 decades. A 6-year-old beauty queen found lifeless in her own home the morning after Christmas. A ransom note left behind, and a family whose lives would never be the same. For years, the case has been wrapped in suspicion, rumors, and endless speculation. But now, her father, Jon Ramsey, steps forward with a revelation that could change everything. He claims that with the right use of modern technology, the mystery that's lingered unsolved since 1996 may finally reach its breaking point. Yet, as always in this case, nothing is ever that simple. Before the headlines, before the cameras, before the tragedy, Jon Ramsey was known as something entirely different. Born in 1943 in Lincoln, Nebraska, he grew up with discipline, drive, and ambition. After studying electrical engineering and business, he entered the rising world of technology just as computers were beginning to transform industries. By the mid-90s, his company, Access Graphics, was worth over $1 billion. To his colleagues, Jon was a sharp, intelligent businessman. To his neighbors, he was the family man who seemed to have everything: a successful career, a beautiful wife, and children he adored. Among them was JonBenét, born in 1990. A little girl with sparkling eyes, blonde hair, and a smile that captured hearts instantly. She wasn't just a child who played with dolls and dreamed of Christmas mornings. Under her mother Patsy's guidance, she entered beauty pageants, where her charisma and charm shined. Crowns, sashes, trophies. JonBenét quickly became a rising star. To outsiders, the Ramseys looked picture perfect. Jon, the accomplished provider. Patsy, the graceful mother and former beauty queen. JonBenét, the adored daughter who lit up every room. Few could imagine the darkness that would soon consume this family. It was December 26, 1996, the day after Christmas. The Ramsey household was supposed to be filled with excitement. They were preparing for a family trip. Their home, decorated and festive, carried the warmth of the holidays. But by dawn, that warmth would collapse into horror. Around 5:30 a.m., Patsy Ramsey walked down the stairs and noticed something strange. A 3-page note sat on the staircase. At first glance, it appeared to be a ransom note. It demanded $1,000,000 for JonBenét's safe returner, bizarrely specific figure, later discovered to be nearly identical to Jon's recent Christmas bonus. The note warned them not to call the police. But panic took over. Patsy dialed 911, her voice trembling as she told the dispatcher her daughter had been kidnapped. Within minutes, the Ramsey home was swarming with police, friends, and even a family pastor. Instead of securing the crime scene, the house became chaotic, with people moving through rooms, touching surfaces, and contaminating potential evidence. For investigators, it was the worst start possible. For hours, police searched. The ransom note, unusually long and written with the family's own pen and paper, raised eyebrows. Who writes a 3-page letter during a kidnapping? Why ask for such an oddly specific sum? Investigators waited for the kidnappers to make contact, but no call came. Then, around 1 p.m., Jon Ramsey took matters into his own hands. Against orders, he searched the basement. Behind a door in a little-used storage room, he found the unthinkable: JonBenét's lifeless body, partially covered by a white blanket. A garrote, fashioned from cord and a broken paintbrush, was tied around her neck. She had also suffered a blow to the head. Jon carried her upstairs, placing her near the Christmas tree, and in that moment, the crime scene was irreversibly compromised. From the start, suspicion grew not toward a faceless intruder, but toward the family themselves. The ransom note, the lack of forced entry, the strange circumstances, it all pointed, in the eyes of investigators and the public, back to the Ramseys. Patsy, with her beauty queen past and strong personality, was scrutinized heavily. Some speculated she had lashed out in anger, then staged the note. Jon, the wealthy father, was accused of masterminding a cover-up. Even Burke, just 9 years old at the time, was pulled into the storm, with tabloids suggesting he may have hurt his sister in a childish fight. The Ramseys denied everything, but, in the court of public opinion, they were already guilty. Television interviews they gave didn't help. Viewers found their demeanor strange, too rehearsed, too defensive, not grieving enough. Talk shows, magazines, and tabloids ran with the narrative. It wasn't just a crime anymore, it was a spectacle. By 1999, a grand jury secretly voted to indict John and Patsy on charges of child abuse resulting in death, but the district attorney refused to sign it, citing lack of evidence. The Ramseys escaped prosecution, but not suspicion. Their lives were stained. Years dragged on. The case grew colder. Then in 2006, tragedy struck again. Patsy Ramsey died of ovarian cancer at just 49. She went to her grave under the cloud of suspicion. A woman both mourned and accused. That same year, forensic science had taken major strides. Investigators decided to retest evidence from the crime scene, and what they discovered was stunning. On JonBenét's clothing, they found unidentified male DNA that did not match John, Patsy, Burke, or any relatives. It belonged to someone else. In 2008, the Boulder District Attorney declared the Ramseys formally cleared. For the first time, science seemed to confirm what John had always said. Someone else committed the crime. But while the DNA evidence exonerated the family, it did not solve the case. The killer was still unknown, and theories continued to thrive. Some experts questioned whether the DNA was contamination, perhaps from a factory worker who had handled the clothing before purchase. Others believed it was the silent witness pointing directly to the intruder John always insisted was responsible. The debate raged on. For John Ramsey, the DNA became an obsession. It wasn't just evidence, it was hope. He argued that modern forensic genealogy, the same technology that had unmasked the Golden State Killer after decades of dead ends, could finally bring answers. He pointed to cases where cold-blooded criminals had been exposed years later through distant relatives. DNA found in genealogy databases, if it worked for others, why not for JonBenét? But the Boulder Police Department resisted. They claimed the DNA samples were too limited, too possibly contaminated, too uncertain to pursue. John saw it differently. To him, their reluctance wasn't scientific caution, it was fear. Fear of admitting past mistakes, fear of opening old wounds, fear of losing control of the case. He refused to accept that. Over the years, John has pushed tirelessly. He's demanded independent reviews, lobbied lawmakers for reforms, and fought for families of cold case victims to have more legal power to insist on re-examination. He argued that justice should never expire. If technology exists to uncover the truth, refusing to use it is nothing short of negligence. Meanwhile, the public remained deeply divided. From the very first headlines in 1996, the case captivated America. A wealthy family, a ransom note written inside the house, a child found in her own basement. Nothing about it made sense, and people became amateur detectives, convinced they could crack the case from their living rooms. For years, the Ramseys were vilified. Strangers saw them as guilty long before DNA evidence suggested otherwise. Even after being cleared, suspicion clung to their names. Online forums, podcasts, documentaries. JonBenét's story became the ultimate true crime puzzle, debated endlessly by those convinced of their own theories. Yet as time passed, sympathy grew for John. Here was a man who had lost his daughter, lost his wife, and spent decades under suspicion. Still, he never gave up. At events like CrimeCon, he shared his story, not to clear his own name, but to demand change. He reminded people that the justice system must evolve. That DNA isn't just science, it's a key to closure for countless families. Life moved on, though forever scarred. In 2011, John remarried. His wife, Jan Rousseau, is a fashion designer, and together they live a quieter life in Moab, Utah, surrounded by children and grandchildren from their blended family. He still speaks publicly, still fights for DNA testing, but he also tries to embrace normal moments of peace. Burke Ramsey, on the other hand, has chosen silence. Now in his late 30s, he works in technology in Michigan, far from the spotlight. In a rare 2016 interview, he spoke about how the media destroyed his childhood, turning him into a suspect when he was only 9. Since then, he has retreated entirely, refusing even to participate in recent Netflix documentaries. For him, survival means privacy. Nearly 30 years later, the case is still unresolved, but cracks may finally be appearing. In 2025, Boulder police leadership met with John for 90 minutes, and for the first time, he left feeling encouraged. The new leadership hinted at openness toward forensic genealogy, something the department had resisted for decades. It's not confirmation, not a guarantee, but for John, even the slightest shift is progress. And he has gone further, telling the world he holds proof that could change everything. Whether that's optimism, strategy, or reality remains to be seen. But here's what we know. The case of JonBenét Ramsey refuses to fade. The mystery remains one of America's most infamous. And as technology advances, the question lingers louder than ever. Could DNA finally crack it? Could the truth, buried under decades of suspicion and mistakes, finally come to light? What do you think about John Ramsey's claim? Is DNA the key that will unlock one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in history? After studying electrical engineering and business, he entered the tech world at a time when computers were just beginning to reshape industries. His career flourished, and by the mid-1990s, he had founded Access Graphics, a computer services company that would eventually be valued at over $1 billion. Those who knew him described John as intelligent and focused, but also private. He wasn't a man who sought attention or the spotlight. At home, though, he was very different. Friends and neighbors saw him as a dedicated father who adored his children and worked hard to give them the best. He and his wife, Patsy, a former beauty queen herself, raised their family in Boulder, Colorado, where they were deeply involved in their community. But one can't talk about John Ramsey without mentioning his daughter. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born in 1990. From the very beginning, she was the shining light of the family. A little girl with big, curious eyes, golden hair, and a dazzling smile. She seemed destined to stand out. With her mother's guidance, she entered child beauty pageants, where she quickly made a name for herself. With the crowns, sashes, and trophies, JonBenét was a rising star in the pageant world. Known not only for her looks, but for her charisma and charm, on stage. To many in Boulder, the Ramseys looked like the picture-perfect American family. John was the accomplished provider, Patsy the elegant mother, and JonBenét the adored little girl whose presence lit up every room. She was often described as a child full of life. She was playful, creative, and affectionate, with a natural ability to capture hearts wherever she went. But just as JonBenét was stepping into the world with bright promise, no one ever imagined the darker fate that awaited them. Something that was capable of turning their family's name into one of the most infamous in true crime history. And for decades, this crime remained unsolved, constantly overshadowed by rumors, suspicion, and unanswered questions. Yet today, John Ramsey claims he holds the one thing the world has been waiting for. And that is where the story takes its sharpest and most haunting turn. The push for justice. When people hear the name John Ramsey, they often think of a grieving father trapped in one of America's most enduring mysteries. But in recent years, John has tried to change that picture. He doesn't only want to be remembered as the man who lost his daughter under tragic circumstances. He wants to be known as the man who refused to give up, one who insisted that modern science could still bring justice, even decades later. For years, John has argued that technology has advanced far beyond what investigators used in the late 1990s and early 2000s. He pointed to forensic genetic genealogy, the very same tool that unmasked the Golden State Killer after more than 40 years. If it worked for one of the most notorious unsolved serial cases in American history, why couldn't it work for the JonBenét case? John insisted that there is DNA evidence from the crime scene, found on JonBenét's clothing, that was never properly explored with today's tools. He believed this evidence held the key, and he's been vocal about it. But here's where the clash begins. The Boulder Police Department has not shared John's enthusiasm. Their stance has been cautious, if not outright resistant. Investigators have argued that the DNA evidence may not be as reliable as John believes. According to them, it could be a mixture of profiles, possibly touched or contaminated over the years, Some even suggested that the trace DNA might belong to someone who had no connection to the crime at all, perhaps a factory worker, or someone who handled the clothing before it ever reached the Ramsey household. That explanation, however, didn't sit well with John. To him, dismissing the DNA was just another way of closing the door on progress. He felt the reluctance wasn't based on science, but on a lack of willpower, or worse, a desire to avoid admitting past mistakes. And so, he has made it his mission to push, to argue, and to demand that the evidence be tested with the very best methods available today. John has also pointed to examples that are hard to ignore. In California, investigators used genealogical DNA databases to track down Joseph D'Angelo, better known as the Golden State Killer, after decades of dead ends. In New York, advances in DNA technology also played a role in cracking the Gilgo Beach murders. John, these cases prove his point. The tools are there, the breakthroughs are possible, and the only thing missing is the determination to apply them. He has said repeatedly that if investigators are willing to embrace this technology, the case can finally move forward. Over the years, John has met with law enforcement officials in hopes of persuading them. Some meetings have been disappointing, with officials holding the same line about contamination and uncertainty. For John, those moments are a reminder of how far he still has to go. But there have also been signs of hope. Recently, he had a 90-minute meeting with Boulder police leadership, and for the first time in a long while, he left feeling encouraged and hopeful. That optimism came from the new leadership within the department, which appears more open to exploring advanced DNA methods. The head of the department signaled a willingness to at least consider forensic genealogy, a shift from the rigid refusal of earlier years. For John, that meeting was more than just talk. It was a sign that the walls might finally be cracking. He believes that with the right pressure, the department could allow independent experts to re-examine the DNA and push the case into new territory. John hasn't limited his efforts to closed-door meetings. He has also become an advocate for legislative reform. In Colorado, he has pushed for laws that would allow families of homicide victims to demand independent reviews of cold cases. He points to the Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act as a model, saying that families deserve a legal pathway to seek progress when local police departments stall. To him, this isn't just about one case anymore. It's about changing the way unsolved murders are handled across the board. He argues that families should not have to wait decades while evidence sits unused in storage. Instead, they should be able to push for outside experts, new tests, and modern approaches whenever a case remains cold. John has also worked to rally support beyond the legal and police circles. He has spoken at events, given interviews, and made his case to lawmakers. He has reminded them that DNA technology doesn't just serve science, it should equally serve justice. His persistence has gained attention, and slowly, more voices have joined his call for action. But as John would soon find, not everyone shared in his enthusiasm and raised hopes. Some officials argue that constantly revisiting the case drains resources from current investigations. Others worry about setting a precedent where families could demand reinvestigations at any time. But John counters that justice should never expire. If technology exists that can help solve a crime, then refusing to use it is unacceptable. As of now, there is a sense of cautious optimism. Under fresh leadership, Colorado authorities have said publicly that 2025 could be the year this case sees a breakthrough. They are looking at updated DNA tools, renewed investigative strategies, and yes, forensic genealogy. It's not a promise of resolution. It's not confirmation of John's bold declaration that he has proof, but it is movement. And for John, that movement matters. After decades of frustration, even a hint of progress feels like a victory. But let's take a step back to the unfortunate event that resulted in this movement. The heartbreaking murder. It was the morning after Christmas, December 26, 1996, when panic ripped through the Ramsey home in Boulder, Colorado. The Ramseys were supposed to be preparing for a family trip. They had spent Christmas Day together, exchanging gifts and enjoying the warmth of the holiday season. John Ramsey, A successful businessman had built a comfortable life for his wife Patsy and their children, 9-year-old Burke and 6-year-old JonBenét. Their home was large, decorated for the holidays, and filled with the excitement that followed a Christmas morning. But that excitement turned into horror before dawn. Patsy Ramsey was the first to discover that something was terribly wrong. Around 5:30 a.m., she walked downstairs and noticed a 3-page note sitting on the staircase. At first glance, it looked like a ransom note. The letter demanded $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return, a strangely specific number, which investigators later learned was almost identical to the amount of John's recent Christmas bonus. The note instructed the Ramseys not to call the police, but panic overtook Patsy. Instead of staying quiet, she ran to the phone and dialed 911. Her voice, recorded on that call, trembled as she told the dispatcher her daughter had been kidnapped. Within minutes, police arrived. Neighbors, friends, and even a family minister came to the house to comfort the Ramseys. The home quickly filled with people. It was the worst possible scenario for an investigation. The crime scene was contaminated before evidence could be secured. But before that morning, the family had planned to fly to Michigan to visit John's older children from his first marriage. Their bags were already packed. According to John and Patsy, the night before had ended peacefully. They had tucked JonBenét into bed after a busy Christmas day. Burke was also asleep. Then, in the early hours of the morning,